Hey all, grab your favorite beverage as we chat around the fire with today's discussion around infrastructure as code, Azure architecture considerations when adopting a new region such as the Azure New Zealand North region. Today we have a pioneer of the guest, Mr. Terraformer himself, Mark Tinderholt, who joins me from another place and time in the sphere we call planet Earth. Mark, thank you for joining me today. Would you like to introduce yourself before we delve into further conversations?
Oh, sure, Luke. Hey, thanks for having me on. Yeah, we are all space travelers here on this spherical spaceship called Planet Earth. My name is Mark, and I work for Microsoft. I am supposed to say that, so that people know. Whatever I say is not official. It's my opinions and stuff like that. But I have a YouTube channel called the Azure Terraformer, and I wrote a book called Mastering Terraform. So should be available July 26th. So check it out.
Nice. I'm gonna have to keep an eye on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I know it's quite late there, and it's two. I had looked at the time, but 2:11 o'clock, 2:11 p.m. In New Zealand. So yeah, you're definitely time. Yeah, it's time travelers. So we have the technology, but thank you for coming and
Yeah, no worries. It's not
discussing.
past my bedtime.
So let's just cover some of the basics first for the audience around like you do a lot in the community around Terraform, which is greatly appreciated. I've definitely learned a lot. I know Terraform is definitely a daily driver for me, delivering Azure solutions, but
Nice.
infrastructure as code can be very simple or very complex. Before we get into sort of your thoughts around adopting infrastructure as code as a new region. Do you have any thoughts around really the pros of using infrastructure as code compared to your old ClickOps for delivering and managing cloud solutions?
Well, I mean, I come from a day when I was a software developer, and we literally pitched over an MSI executable to the ops team to go install it on servers that they would rack. So moving from that era into an era where developers like myself can write our own code to describe our environments how we want them to be in code rather than like in a Word doc that we then send off to the ops
Yeah,
team who goes provisions the hardware from CDW and then it's like where's our installer? I feel like the agency that you get, particularly in the app dev role, right? The control that you have over the environment, the ownership that you have, just I think right there it makes it worth it. And there's nothing more frustrating, than trying to manage an environment and people inevitably are going to make change, right? And they're not always going to write it down, right? We've all been there. Like you go
yeah,
fix something, and it's you don't instantaneously know what you need to fix. So you fix this, you fix that. You try a bunch of different things, and one of them worked, and one of them fixed it.
but you
But
don't
it's like,
know what
well,
changed. Yeah,
yeah, well, what actually fixed it? Like I did 18 things right from the Stack Overflows and from the Googles, but like one of them worked. Okay, we're too busy. We got to move on. Like it's working, just leave it. And then like you need to reproduce the environment. Like what do you do, right? Like how do you get back to that uh, known good state? And so infrastructure as code just provides an extremely repeatable way to produce the environments that you need to be stable for your applications and services to run. And ever since the first time like I did that, it was just like, why wouldn't you do this? This is
yeah.
amazing.
I
So
think,
that's been my journey.
yeah, I think you've touched on something actually quite key that I want to bring up because I know from my perspective, using infrastructure as code has saved my butt several times because
Caster.
yeah, especially like recent project I had where we're just trying to figure out these network security group rules and it's like, does it work? make a change. Does it work? Make a change. Does it work? Make a change. And that's just the reality sometimes of actually getting something working. But
Yep.
knowing that I can redeploy the code at the end of the day means that I'm quite like it will be exactly the same. So what I wanted to touch on was more, I think people think about like Bicep and Terraform infrastructure as code solutions as more of a, I want to deploy something, not so much about configuration state, like making it so, as Captain Picard would say, right?
Yeah, make it so. Picard, by the way, my favorite El Capitan. No, that's one of the things. It's kind of like this mindset that I'm on my channel. I'm actively trying to work against. Because I refer to it as the cloud shotgun, where you see infrastructure as code as just like a more expedient way of getting stuff provisioned to the cloud. I like, and this is where Terraform really kind of I appreciated it about it. Like, is Terraform truly feels like a development environment. It feels like a software development experience. And so when you start developing an environment infrastructure with Terraform, you start like you would with a normal software development project. You start small, and you build the first component, and you attach another one, and you expand that environment organically, running Terraform apply iteratively, building out this environment step by step by step by step, and only traversing to the next step once you feel like you're on a solid footing, right? And I feel like there are definitely like very large modules, and in the ARM days, like we had these huge templates,
Yeah,
but it's like anytime you wanted to go change those things, like the bigger it was, like the more sticky, the more messy it was, and then the harder it was to really make large change. Whereas I feel like with Terraform, um,
it's more
you
declarative, right? It's like this is exactly what I want it to be. Make it make it so again. Yeah.
yeah, and like you can kind of almost unwind it easier too, right? Like just commenting out like a block of resources, and then rerunning apply, and like, okay, I just need to walk that back, and being able to work with those partial state environments, like everything everything's been deployed, everything's been provisioned, that I feel comfortable with, right? And you can walk back those things that you're not comfortable with until you go figure it out, and then you add it back in, and then it's like, all right, I'm on solid ground again. So it's similar to, like I'm a traditionally a C# developer, started the world with C++ and Java, but it's kind of like that. If you there's going to be you're not just going to go stub out like 100 REST APIs or anything like that, right? You're and just like have them all broken, with thousands of lines of code, right? You're going to want to only kind of light those things up as they've been implemented, and there's a certain level of built-in quality. And I think the same is true with infrastructure as code. And it just the development process with Terraform just felt like a right fit. I think Bicep is definitely heading in that direction, and it's definitely a great leap forward over what we had with ARM templates. And
Oh,
when I
yeah.
started on Azure, I was doing ARM templates, right? So and that was nice, because it was declarative, but it lacked kind of that iterative, nature, that development nature, because I mean, just the
Because you were
constructs of
too
J.
worried about like getting the syntax right
Yeah,
versus what you were deploying or what you were managing. Yeah.
yeah, or yeah, and yeah, the syntax of JSON is rather cumbersome, and just like the trying to embed somewhat dynamic symbolic gestures within the JSON was inherently cumbersome and kind of problematic to um, to get right, as a developer, and to like have confidence that it was right. Now I think Bicep is definitely taken a page out of Terraform's book and is like, headed in that right direction. So it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, I mean, it's Terraform versus Bicep has come up in conversations that I have with clients, and either or is better than definitely better than nothing. I always, that old IT acronym, it depends.
Mm.
Because, if you're an organization that's, and this is how I put it, if you're an organization that's just using Azure, Bicep. If you're an organization that may be wanting to automate stuff on AWS or maybe external providers like Cloudflare and things like that, then Terraform's a no-brainer. But it all gives you that declarative configuration that, yeah, that's great. So us,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
us in New Zealand, we don't have Azure region yet, but the New Zealand North region is coming. So
Yeah.
yeah, woohoo! Yeah,
I'm
it's
excited.
it's it's going to make quite a few people happy, especially around data residency and latency concerns.
Yeah.
And yeah, we don't want to get into a war with those Aussie folk about. Yeah, I made a joke about calling Australia East, New Zealand West, but yeah, we'll see what happens there. Yeah, but
We have a similar joke in the States, like northwest Indiana is basically a suburb of Chicago. It's like,
yeah.
but yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, we have sports like rugby. It's quite a trans Tasman thing, but yeah, in the geek core, in my world, it's always about the Azure. But
Yeah.
yeah, I have no life, so there you go. um, so before we go more into sort of the infrastructure code sort of considerations when adopting regions, I just want to know from outside of your sort of infrastructure as code experience whether you have any best practice or recommendations that people can consider when adopting a completely new region such as New Zealand North? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that when you onboard to Azure, whether you're just, or any cloud for that matter, but
Yeah.
like what we're talking Azure, right? Um, you're going to want to have, certain structures set up as part of your governance, and the mechanisms by which you can operate, um, your organization within that region, or the regions that you want to, host in. And whether you call it landing zones or, shared infrastructure, you're going to need to be thinking through what baseline configurations, what baseline environments need to be out there, whether that's, shared network, Azure policies, management group hierarchies, and like getting those policies in place that tackle a new region.
So
Like in New
you're leaning like the cloud adoption framework, right? And
Yeah, yeah, kind of like those foundations that any organization is going to need. Um, you definitely need to make you definitely want to think about, making sure that they were ready for that new region that you were going to go tackle, and that from all of that connective tissue, right, from that you need to operate, like the observability stuff, right? Like, hey, can I see what my network traffic is in this region? Like, do I have Azure Monitor log, set up in the right places for this region, so that I can start onboarding new workloads. Um, you know what I mean. It also depends on like what paradigms you want your applications to be hosted in. Are you rocking a lot of VMs? Do you have VM infrastructure where you can replicate your virtual machine images into that new region? Your gold images, like, are they there? Um, Container registries, right? Um, AKS clusters, if you if you're working with Kubernetes, and thinking about the kind of those shared infrastructure things and lighting those up and connecting those to either your existing footprint or like an entirely new thing. So yeah, that would be top of my mind if I was going to be entering a new region.
Yeah, I think they're definitely valid points. I don't know if you've got any thoughts around the whole platform engineering versus, because you've got within the scope of Azure and kind of the concept of platform engineering, you've got your platform landing zones, right? Which is identity, it's security, it's management, it's network, and so those are owned by usually a central team, right? And you want your application landing zones where, like, you might have an integration team, or you might have, I don't know, a container team or another team delivering something, consuming the services that you manage centrally, but it's decentralized with like application teams consuming those services as well. So I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts about that, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear if
Yeah,
so.
I think I mean, most organizations, and these days, like the term platform team and app dev team has like been thrown around.
Yeah,
In my mind, platform team is like kind of rebranding the old guard disciplines that we had previously, right? It's like infra, network, sec. But under kind of maybe a cross disciplinary banner, maybe. But in reality, I would imagine, I mean, prior to joining Microsoft, I was in consulting, right? And most organizations, like, it's not like, oh, the industry has adopted platform team. Let's flick a light switch, and now
yeah,
we have
yeah,
we have some like coherent like platform team, app dev team split. Now, I mean, there's still going to be the same silos, and of course, every organization is different, right? But you're still going to have it's changing culture, changing
yeah.
organizational
It's a
structures doesn't happen.
mindset. It's a mindset thing, I think, again as well around
True.
like platform engineering. To me, you're right. It's a word that has definitely come a lot more into the fray, and it's almost the next
Yeah.
iteration of DevOps sort of going right. This is everyone's doing DevOps now, but how has it actually turned out in reality? And you end up with a cultural shift of going, we're going to do platform engineering because that team is then enabling
Yeah.
these other subsets or these application teams to consume cloud services, not necessarily taking over from it. But I think business, yeah, different business context is definitely key to Azure. Like that's what it's for, right? It's the technology that helps deliver business outcomes, not
Yeah. And I think this platform team, app dev team nomenclature, I mean, it makes sense. Like it's trying to it's trying to recognize that there are different flora and fauna of cloud operators, right? Cloud personas, right? That have different use cases, in which they use the cloud, and how close they are to the customer. Maybe might be a part of it, right? Whereas the platform team is more focused on technical enablers, whereas app dev teams are more focused on functionality, right? Features that might hit, whoever your customer might be more directly. Um, so yeah, I think it makes sense, and I think it just recognizes like the different ways in which people are using the cloud, and as the cloud is like proliferated, like it's gotten bigger and bigger with more features and functionality and serving a plethora of more personas, right? Each with their own goals and objectives, right? Our thinking about it kind of has to shift in order to cope with those new realities, right?
yeah. I'm gonna flick back to Terraform again. But
Yeah, we're getting all metaphysical here.
yeah, yeah. I can go off on completely different tangents, but this is, I think. what makes these chats so good, because it is the whole, well, let's delve into that a bit more. But um, so when, like, we've covered off sort of some of the pros around infrastructure as code as like enabler, configuration, make it so, being able to just repeatedly understand some of that stuff. But let's talk about CI/CD, so continuous deployment and integration of that. And I mean, it's all good for me. I'm an engineer. I've just gotten access to New Zealand North. I'm really happy. I'm having a party, some drinks to celebrate. And I've just deployed my own container registry or something using Terraform from my local computer. But
Hmm.
that's infrastructure as code, right? So, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It is.
It is. So, but like, I'm done. I can tick it. I can say, yeah, I've delivered this. But what about CI/CD? So continuous deployment integration with something like Azure DevOps. How
Yeah.
how does this fulfill the requirement of working as a team and working a lot more standard? Any gotchas or any thoughts around this?
Yeah. I think it kind of reminds me of like the difference. I'm pulling from my app dev background here, so I apologize. But like in Visual Studio, like you can set up an application for Azure, and then you could right click in Visual Studio and say publish, right?
Yeah.
And it'll publish it out there. And you did that. I mean, it's in the cloud, it's in production, right? But like you did it from your local machine, right? Um, that's basically the equivalent, the app dev equivalent, right, of running Terraform apply from your local machine and doing Terraform apply auto approve, right? It's just like, there we go, like right click publish,
Yeah.
it's code, right? But you're using your local environment and kind of like hacking it in there. So I think you can do that, right? Give it a go your first time, try it out, right? Understand like the mechanics of what the tool's doing. But
And
if you want
don't do what
to,
I did first up, which was put my state file in my Git repo.
yeah, yeah, that's a little scary, especially because state files have some sensitive data in them, right? You want to keep that stuff secure, and a lot, if you're new to Terraform, like you're probably not thinking about like what it like. Maybe you don't even realize there's a state file there unless you really look closely. When you're
Yeah.
checking your git ignore, right? But um, yeah, I mean, I think it's all about making the when somebody moves off of like a local operator running Terraform locally, and moving it up to a CI/CD pipeline that runs it on your behalf. Um, it's about making it repeatable. It's about removing individual heroics and replacing it with teamwork, right? So if you're a one man shop, go ahead, run it locally,
Yeah.
But like if you need to work on a team like the rest of us humans, the individual heroics are gonna go out of style pretty quick, right? So it works on my machine, is gonna come in and bite you later. And so I get a tremendous amount of joy and fulfill. This is going to sound really dorky, but watching a GitHub action or watching an Azure DevOps pipeline that's running Terraform apply on my behalf, right? And it, get green check marks, right? And I'm like, aha, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
You
means
you
that,
win at life. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'm winning at life. And
Yeah.
you're really winning at life if you can rerun the pipeline again and it's like no changes. that's when you're really winning at life, with infrastructure as code and with Terraform in particular, because it's like okay, the state files, there. everything's all wired up. Like this environment is stable, right? So, yeah, those give me good feelings when that happens.
There's a security aspect of CI/CD as well, right? Where I think you touched on it with, the deployment is doing it on your behalf. That doesn't mean that as a developer or someone who's enabling Azure that I should have owner rights across everything, right? Because wouldn't the CI/CD do that for me?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. It's like if in a multi-subscription environment, right? I might have owner rights to the dev sub, right? Because it's just my dev team. We're in there, and we're just rocking and rolling. And maybe enterprise has thrown some Azure policies that give us headaches from time to time. Who knows? But I'm not going to be guaranteed those same level of permissions in prod or higher level environments. So, once you run it in a CI/CD pipeline, you get yourself running like that in dev, right? Then, yeah, you might have elevated permissions in that environment, mainly so that you can go tinker, right?
Yeah.
But if your main branch, that has your desired state, like what you want, what your environment to look like, then you can feel confident that when you basically reconfigure that pipeline and tell it to run as a different persona, a different managed identity, a different service principal, however you're rocking it, and that identity has access to prod, right, or whatever environment, then it's like, okay, I feel good that this is going to work, right? And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that being able to navigate those different security boundaries is also part of that puzzle as well. And it's also why right click publish isn't going to work either, right? That's the same reason why that
Yeah.
fails down, because like I get like, please, I hope no organizations are letting devs right click publish into prod, right? That would be pretty scary. So yeah.
So sometimes technology, I think, saves us from ourselves.
Yeah, hopefully.
That's probably
Yeah,
a polite way of
that's the
putting it,
idea.
but yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, CI/CD as well opens up, the ability to peer review your change, and like you already said, like as soon as you push into main, right? But you may have branch policies that no, you need two people to approve this, or which requires someone somewhere to delegate to go, Luke, what are you smoking? Like this is not supposed to be here. And so you're also protecting yourself from deploying into prod changes that might inadvertently happen. So I think there's a
yep,
safety net of just set it up and work with it from the get go and try not to deploy it from your local computer.
yeah, yeah. I mean, whatever your Git flow process looks like, I think it's um, it's definitely a good idea to have Terraform plan built into that process to give you an eye on even if you're just pushing to a low level
Hmm.
environment, like, okay, this is the Terraform that we're rocking in dev, and there's a tiny little delta with dev, but it's also kind of nice to know, okay, on this pull request, if like we were to merge this, then what is the actual change to prod, right? Or to these other environments, like that might have be upstream from us, right, or downstream, right? And so being able to understand the the drift, that is drift, as well as like just
The
intentional change, right? That
blast
that
radius, yeah.
yeah, that have manifested in those downstream environments. You can kind of get an idea of like, in the same way, like if you're gonna refactor like a portion of your code base, the more change you inject at one time, the more inherent implementation risk there is, right? So, in the same thing goes with infrastructure, right? If you're like flipping the table in dev, right? you might be running Terraform apply more frequently in dev, and you might be smoothing out some of those edges, but you've accumulated this massive change. And then once you go, it's worked so far incrementally in dev, but when you
Yep.
go one shot it into like prod or a higher order, a test, QA, whatever, it may not go beautifully, right? So it also kind of, helps you keep an eye on how far away you are from other environments,
I
which
like
is,
I like that idea actually because yeah, I know in my day-to-day job we usually go we're deploying to dev, so we'll run our Terraform plan once, and that's only across dev. And then we're going to deploy into UAT and then prod, and of course each one of those will have a specific Terraform plan. But you're right because we could be doing months of changes in dev but production, it's actually like those little increments add up and you're doing actually
yeah,
a massive deployment into prod. But knowing kind of the impact or the changes while you're deploying dev to prod, like being able to run those, because just because you do a plan doesn't mean you actually have to deploy, right?
right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I like doing that just to so that we remember, right? Because like you said, we sometimes get tunnel vision. It's like, well, we're going from point A to point B, but really, ultimately, eventually, is we're going to go from B to C to D to E to prod, right? Um, and the more you run plan, like in those other environments, the more you'll also pick up drift, right? And be like, oh, like what? Why? Like, did a policy run? Like, why? What's going on here? Why do we even have a delta in this environment?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I think running plan is a very healthy thing to do, for sure.
Thanks, Mark. So we've got our CI/CD pipeline now. We've got our Terraform deployment working. We've got happy engineers. What about, so let's discuss kind of scalability and resiliency concerns when using Terraform. And what I'm thinking about with this question is more about the state file. So an example is you have, I don't know, a common scenario would be you're deploying infrastructure as code with Azure DevOps. You've got the state file, Terraform straight state file that's running in an Azure storage account. And that Azure storage account might be just LRS or, just sitting there quite happily running. Do you have any thoughts around the scalability and resiliency concerns of just running Terraform in Azure and things that you could think about for running your deployments in production?
Hmm. Well, you definitely should should have a disaster recovery plan for your state files, right? Because when you've adopted infrastructure as code in Terraform, it is part of your operational control plane, right? Like it is a recovery system, it is a change agent, it is an important aspect of like how you manage infrastructure. So you should recognize it as such, and you should plan accordingly. So um, you should definitely plan to back up your state files, replicate across region. um, I mean, LRS is okay for playing around, but you should, I mean, ideally you'd be on GRS, GZRS, with some read access as well, right? So, um, but the state does not take a lot of storage either, so it's not like this is going to be a super expensive like disaster
Yep.
recovery plan. So the weighted cost odds here are well in your favor. um, but at the same time, like, you also should think about how you compartmentalize your deployments, right? Um, because
One
if
state file to rule them all.
yeah, and trust me, I've been there. Like when I first started using Terraform, I made probably all the mistakes in the book, right? I mean, I've been in situations where I put everything, like I have multiple microservices that are deployed through one state file, and ultimately, it eventually got to a point where it would take a really really long time to run Terraform apply, and so you have things that will cause drag, like that, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, it's an inconvenience. My deployment process takes 30-45 minutes. Like that sucks. Um, but then you're also going to run into situations where it could actually pose a risk to your ability to operate the platform if you're doing like multi-region deployments, like in one apply, right? If one region is actually unavailable, right, then and you try and run apply, you're not going to get Axe, right? Like you're gonna have problems, right? So even if you want to enact change in those healthy regions, how are you going to do that if
Mm.
if you got a partial, state availability? So thinking about how to segment the workup, so that if you are running active multi-region, you may want to think about segmenting those regions, and then having, if there are global resources like Azure Front Door,
Yeah.
Cosmos DB,
DNS
even
zones. Yeah.
even Cosmos DB, when you have region replication, right? There can be a risk there in the if there's an outage, with one of those replicants, right? It can be problematic from that standpoint. So um, carving up your root module or your Terraform workspace, so to speak, whatever or your stack, right?
Yeah.
Whatever nomenclature we're going to start using now, right? Stacks is kind of like an upcoming thing, but would you need to be thinking about that blast radius around those components, and you should be thinking about day two. You should be thinking about what could go wrong, right? And a lot of people, when they're in that cloud shotgun mindset, they're just
Yeah.
like, they don't think about that. They're just like, I just care about day one. I just want to get out there, and start like running, but they don't think about how to live with it, right? It's like people that go couch, shopping for couches or sofas. I don't know what they call them down under, but it's like, you don't think about like just the only thing. If the only thing you're thinking about is how to measure the door to make sure you can get in your house, not how it's actually going to like be like to live with this thing, you know is this thing going to be grotesquely large and like cover up the TV or the windows? Like you got to think about what it's going to be like to live with this long term, not just like how do we get in the door, right? It's a
Yeah.
but
Uh,
it's a hard mindset shift.
yeah. I think it's, yeah, there's a couple of points there because I know, you might go, oh, we've deployed it, like deployment stamps, right? We've deployed this web app running in this region in front of front door, and our DR disastery. I'm just making up words, is what I do. um,
Strategery.
yeah. This like
It's okay. We're Americans. We make up words all the time, man. It's fine.
this and the disaster strategy is, we're going to rerun the infrastructure as code, and we're going to deploy this into the second region or another deployment stamp. But if you can't do that if your Terraform, deployment is impacted by the same region that's literally just gone down or inaccessible for whatever region or for
Right.
whatever way.
Yeah, it's a bad day. It's a bad day.
Yeah,
That's what that
it's a
is.
bad day. Yeah. Yeah.
So the whole point of a DR strategy is to make those bad days like a little less bad, right? So um, when you're doing infrastructure as code, that doesn't change. Like you need to be thinking about that for sure.
So let's touch a bit on the modifications of existing resources. So you've you've you're trying to implement a disaster recovery solution, or you've just deployed something like a virtual machine, and you've just upgraded the SKU to, I don't know, another D2 promo series of a virtual machine. What about modifications or rolling back of going, oh, I accidentally changed that SKU size to an F series virtual machine that's now costing $3,000 a month to run because it's NVIDIA GPU capable, right? How would I go about restoring or reverting that change, or could I? Do you have any thoughts around what you've kind of
Control
already
C,
touched on it?
Control C, Control C. No, that's not
Yeah,
going to end well.
drop table Fridays. Yeah.
Can you? How quickly can you click in GitHub Actions to cancel the job? Like, did you get it before the apply started? uh, yeah. So I mean, virtual machines. I mean, and just any infrastructure.
Mm,
Like, there are aspects of the configuration that are more impactful than others, right? And you're hitting on one that's pretty dang impactful, right? Like the
yeah.
VM SKU. So usually with VM SKU, you're going to see a drop, create, or replace, right? And it's yeah, the only real rollback, and honestly, like, if you want to do kind of canary deployments with virtual machines and stuff like that, you have to think, you have to build that into your infrastructure as code design up front, because just like, you know popping popping your VMs in the head like all at once with a new VM image, it might work for my Minecraft server,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like, I don't know if you want to do that in production. So you definitely need to be thinking about like what your release cycle looks like, how you're gonna, um, you know, if you want to do partial load transfer, from one, from current version to vnext, you want to build that into your design, so that when you elicit change within that environment, you're not just like tanking everything. So, um, but from a rollback standpoint, and that also goes into your design, right? Like,
yeah,
you should be thinking about this in your design. What tools do you have in your tool belt? Like, well, you have Git flow, your previous version, previous desired state, last known good state, of Terraform is in Git, right? So you can revert back to that, and or just, you know do a targeted apply using that, um, particular, commit or tag, right, to to the environment of your choice if you want to roll back. But you need to make sure that you understand the ramifications of that, excuse me, of that action, right? Like, if it's, how destructive of an action, um, is it going to be? Because you could end up just, piling on. I think that's a term we have in the States. Like, you make a bad problem worse,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And then
Um,
you're in this loop where it's just like, where's the problem? I don't know. Because, yeah,
yeah. So definitely, I mean, the tools are at your, are available to you, right? Like with Git, having the history, um, and I think just, it's kind of like security. What is it like? Good grooming habits, so like, are half the battle, right? So if you are doing tagging so that like, what are the good versions, what version of the infrastructure, matches up with the Docker images, that you're deploying, etc. So that what works with what, rather than just like last in wins. It's not gonna end well.
and
Right?
this goes back to, what we were talking about earlier with the CI/CD deployments and being able to have someone pull pull review your code, and this is why you don't just deploy it from your laptop. This is why you've got these things in like a Git repo, and you've got these things in a deployment pipeline, and like you said, running the plan across all the environments, so then you can go and capture, hey, where did this change actually happen?
Yeah, yeah. And I've a lot of people that I've talked to are just like, man, I just want this thing. I just want the Terraform apply to just auto approve and just run constantly. Can't we just have it
Mm.
run constantly and like not have a human look at it? I'm like, no, really. Like if it does find something, you want like somebody with some intelligence, human intelligence, to look at it to be able to decide what to do, right? It's not like cloud infrastructure is not like immutable, like just changing a Docker image, right? I mean, it's each of these services that we're provisioning has its own state. And so when you combine all of these resources with each with their own state, um, a lot can go wrong, right? The risk amplifies. So you really need to be considerate and have some intelligent review to look at like okay, was there a change? And how impactful is this change? And that requires a deep insight into the cloud platforms that you're targeting.
Yeah, and I think it's not only a change that could be caused by human intervention as well. It could be a change on the platform level, like something's gone, a service is going to be retired, or a new feature has come on board, and all of a sudden there's been, it's grabbed the latest Azure IAM provider and the latest APIs and gone, woohoo, off to the races. And yeah, so I think it's another consideration as well.
Yeah, yeah, like features. I mean, features get moonlighted. Like they get deprecated. Like get turned off. Like you got to move from V1 off to V2 off. You got to um, uh, uh, handle differences in the Terraform provider, right? Um, the Azure service, the Azure service is moving. The Terraform provider is moving. All these things are moving. The state of your individual resources is moving, right? You have, that goes up. That's amplified if you have humans like traipsing around in these subscriptions as well, right? That we haven't even talked about drift, right?
Yeah.
With humans just kind of stomping on rose gardens and so on and so forth, right?
I like that. I'm gonna borrow that analogy, human stomping on rose gardens. I can use it a lot in customer conversations.
Yeah.
Uh,
And until we can just like blanket no humans have anything but read access, like you're gonna have stomping happening.
yeah, technology saves us from ourselves in a lot of cases, or at least it saves me from myself anyway. Let's just put it that way.
Mm.
Uh, one
So
of
say
the
we.
one of sorry.
So say we all.
Yeah.
Mm.
One of the conversations, and you probably get this a lot, is really around greenfield versus brownfield deployment. So, in the context of New Zealand North, it's going to be greenfield to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Where, yay, we're not stomping on anything because it's nice and clean, and we can, tender and create our own gardens to our own content. But what if what if we're not going to use this region at the moment, or we want to bring on services that are currently existing? So you've got maybe your application deployment, so an app service that has, I don't know, Rediscation in front of it. I'm just making stuff up. But what if you're running this application and it's your mission critical business application? How would you treat that differently in infrastructure as code deployment versus your greenfield environment where you get to craft it from the get go? Can you bring those resources that you're already running that you may have deployed through ClickHops into infrastructure as code? And should you? Well, yeah.
You can, right? There are different strategies to do that. There's of course And I know every IT middle manager out there is going to be like, how do we code gen this? Let's code gen. Code gen. That's the answer,
Yeah.
right?
We have Azure
Uh,
AI up now. Surely that can do something, right? Yeah.
uh, maybe someday, but um, I mean, there are like tools like Azure exporter tool for Terraform. There is a tool called Terraformer, which I didn't even know about, before I created my channel. Which my channel is the Azure Terraformer, but Google actually has this tool and they call it Terraformer, and it's multi-cloud, right? But it's kind of like the same goal as uh, the Azure export tool for Terraform, right? Where you provide basically some query mechanism, usually with tags, or some logical structures that you can kind of define the boundaries of the net that you want to cast to catch the resources, um, like fish. Uh, and then basically it'll spit out a bunch of code. Now, these approaches, like a traditional software developer by trade, we've been trying to code gen stuff for a long time. And does it generate code? Yeah, but you're probably going to spend a significant portion of time going through that code and refactoring it and cleaning it up, and especially with Terraform, like extracting, hard coded values that you want that really should be input variables, um, and kind of testing and things like that, and break fixing, and um, then the question is like, well, is this actually saving us time? That would be the next question. And does this?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a really good point, right? Because people go, oh, we want everything in infrastructure as code, everything that currently exists. One would argue why, because you could do it side by side, or what is the impact of doing it now versus doing it on a new release? Running, that those blue green deployments. I think it's really a good question to ask is, are we going to save ourselves time, or are we going to increase the security or the doing this work, or is it better to do it when we're re-architecting or refactoring it?
Yeah, and when you do it, forget about the code quality that it's producing. Like, are you going to
Mm.
bring part of the value add that infrastructure as code brings is like you're codifying best practices, right? Of like the how you want these environments to be provisioned. So if you're using a code generator to codify whatever's out there, right? You could just be bringing forward a bunch of junk anyway, right? Um, so I, this is probably not going to be super popular with the CIO crowd, but like, I think it's going to be more impactful if you take more of uh, a scalpel approach rather than just like a sledgehammer approach. Um, it's going to breed a deeper understanding of the infrastructure that is currently out there, um, and it's going to highlight the technical debt that you do have that you may not be aware if you just throw it at a code generator and spit out a bunch of junk Terraform code, right? Um, and that I think is like when you have humans applying human intelligence, putting thought, to moving an environment, whether they're just like trying to import a resource one at a time, kind of very focused tactical scalpel mode, and then kind of reverse engineering like what the configuration is for this by importing like a very basic empty shell of a resource block, right? And seeing what the delta is. Like Terraform will tell you what the delta is, and then you have to go make it so, like to quote Picard. And as you're making it so, you're like, oh, yeah, that's not
Mhm.
good. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Uh,
So it makes you think through all those choices
it's
that were
that
made.
almost that strangler fig pattern, right? Where you've got your legacy code, i.e., you've got your environment that's been created and running and operational in ClickOps, and then you've got your strangler, like the strangler fig pattern of taking and modularizing and removing parts of it and slowly moving bit by bit into a more modern state. So it's aligned to that, right?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and then I think my absolute preferred method would be blue green. Right? Is okay. We have this deformed claw over here, right? That nobody knows how it works, and we don't want to touch it, right? Um, we can stand up, the new hotness in a very consistent, repeatable fashion, and just redeploy, right? But now that's a transformation activity as well, but
Mm,
it's a different one. Um, and I think it does allow you to kind of mitigate some of the risk of by letting you get that environment up and test it before you do the cutover. So that
yeah. Thank you, Mark. This has been a great conversation, and hopefully it's of some use to the people that are watching this. I'm just wonder, do you have any last recommendations that, we're quite excited in New Zealand about having this Azure capability well, I know I am, online and enabling the businesses locally to deliver using cloud without, worrying about sort of the data residency requirements and latency and all the other things. But do you have any last recommendations or thoughts that you'd want to give the audience or share?
yeah, excited to see the New Zealand region, come online. Um, I would just say when you're exploring Azure, when you're exploring with Terraform, don't be afraid to start small, right? Um, start start from a blank slate. You know, get your resource group out there. Start adding to it. It's kind of like cooking almost. It's just you've got so many ingredients out there in the Azure RM provider that you can start working with. So don't feel like you have to go shotgun into the cloud. Start small and run Terraform apply many times. Grow it organically and be comfortable. With your footing before you take that next step. That's what I would say.
Thank you,
And
and read your book that's about to come out.
yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be. I would appreciate that, and would love to hear feedback about my book. My book, I cover three clouds, right? Azure, AWS, and GCP. So you can skip the AWS and GCP chapters, but I try and meet the reader where they are. So whatever cloud paradigm you're trying to use, virtual machines, Kubernetes, or serverless, got you covered. If you are unfamiliar with some of those paradigms, like I lay the foundation from a concept standpoint, but it's intended to be a practitioner's book in the sense that end-to-end solutions, full Git flow, automation with GitHub Actions, right? So it's not just like here's Terraform plan,
Yeah.
here's Terraform apply. Good luck. I try and show you the way, like how you should develop, but then also operate in whatever your chosen cloud might be. So
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for coming and speaking with me today. And thank you for everything that you do with the community, your channel, your books, sharing on social media. As a consumer, it's well appreciated, and I know this is on top of your day-to-day job as well. So really appreciate being such a community spirit. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Appreciate it. It's having a lot of fun.
Cool. Thanks all. Bye.
Cheers. See you.